bet you guys are starting to feel hungry. I've had a mini cupcake this morning, so hopefully you won't hear my stomach gurgling. So the BBC had a massive problem. We're just getting more devices hitting our old sites. And at the same time, the budget, the amount of money we get, was decreasing all the time. So I'm going to be talking about how we met that challenge and hopefully share what we learnt so you don't have to go through a similar pain as we did. So why did we actually bother in the first place? Because this responsive malarkey is actually really, really tough. So I'm going to take you back to 2008 and give you a bit of context to why we made these decisions. So stuff used to be really simple. Okay, we used to whinge about IE6, but that's nothing. And we used to have this great relationship between screen size and capability. They were basically proportional. So we could have our nice little mobile site, not much content, and then our massive desktop site. And at the BBC, we had two separate teams dealing with each one. And it was easy for us to kind of compartmentalize these two different stacks. So this is what we did. We built www and mdot. We had our desktop site, a lot of content, lots of images, really, really rich, and people loved it. And the mobile site, where it looked great on small devices, but lacked any depth at all. And there's nothing in between. And of course, as we know, this happened. Drip feeding with the iPad, and then seriously, just looking at that of Anna's presentation, kind of like, we need to get a console. So that's going to be on my shopping list as well. Hopefully it won't waste too much of our time playing games. But it was also not just the developers and the designers having to think about this. It's also the journalists. And they're very, very proud of their desktop site. I mean, it won awards. So it's kind of like prizing it away from them, and that we need to really think about this growing market for mobile. So the landscape is just crazy. Our tester, Dave Blumen, is a bit of a fan of BlackBerry, and he's like, it looks rubbish on BlackBerry, try again. And because it's just so squashed, you've got you haven't got much vertical space. And then you're kind of going from that to some new phones that have just got crazy resolution. And it's just the breadth that makes it really complicated. I should have put a console on there, sorry. And then, of course, you've got the context. You've got connections in the cities that are going to be really, really quick. And then I live in Suffolk, and to be honest, my broadband is slower than my network connection when I come my 3G connection in London, and it really, really sucks. And then I take the train to London twice a week, and that's when it really, really bothers me. Like, you go from one mast to the next mast, the next mast, GPRS, 3G, absolutely nothing, GPRS. And it's just really frustrating as a user. And when we're developing as well, you've got the context, you've got the devices, but the crazy amount of browsers that you can actually install on these devices is scary for developers. You can just see, like, thanks, Google. We've got the stock one, we've got Chrome, we've got Chrome Beta as well. And so when you kind of add up all these different devices, we kind of realize that we don't have any control over how our content is going to be viewed. And that's kind of the problem that we were trying to fix. So this is pretty broken. We can't use this model anymore. And it's something far more complicated. And we can't assume anything. And it's fragmented across not just these two axes, but many: input, connection speed. And it's difficult to group these things together. Going back to the mobile, we could have had a tablet group and had tablet dot, and then console dot, all these different things. But it's impossible to group. They're so fuzzy. So it's really complicated. There's so many. Again, I've forgotten consoles, dot. Again, yeah, there's lots of things to consider. And as there's less money about. And so when you hear about even Google not being able to create specific support for particular mobile platforms, it's like a company like the BBC, where we're funded by the TV license, it's never going to happen. So to simplify it, we kind of looked at it, and actually all we're doing is designing for the web. And you kind of hear this cliche quite a lot, but it's really important to remember. And again, it goes back to the console thing that we just heard from Anna. We're not doing it for devices, we're doing it for the web. But we still got to work out what sort of thing you are. When you come to a BBC site, we need to kind of know, either on the client or on the server, what sort of device you are. And there's these two schools of thought about how this could happen. So there's the approach that LinkedIn take, is where we use user agent sniffing. So on the server, we have some kind of database, such as Wordful, and then we can work out what sort of thing you are and create a template that's specific for that particular group of device. And then there's client side. Well, on the server, we give the same initial markup to everybody. And then we're using feature detection, we're using conditional loading, flexible layout, etc., etc. And these two techniques can actually be used together as well. Of course, we chose responsive design, which was the latter one. Everything's done on the client side. And this helps us as well with a lot of caching. We know that we can cache particular pages really, really well. And when we have to scale like the BBC, the more variations of pages you're kicking out, the more work your servers have to do. So hey, brilliant, high fives all around. Responsive design, get to do conferences, .NET Magazine, brilliant, and everybody's happy. And I just love this quote from Brad Frost, that actually, no one gives a crap. When someone visits your site, they just want to have a great user experience. They don't care if it's responsive design. They don't care if you've used user agent sniffing and someone's going to say, ooh, you use user agent sniffing. It really doesn't matter. It's all about the user. So I'm kind of going to go through some of the pitfalls of responsive design and some of its dirty little secrets that we need to get out in the open. And hopefully, as we go through it, I can show you some of the lessons that we learned. The first one is browser support. As we've seen, we have to support a lot of browsers. And responsive web design uses quite a lot of advanced features. And I just remember when we first started working on this project, the previous mobile team gave us the key to the cupboard. We opened up the cupboard, and there was this collection of cobwebbed old mobile phones, and we just kind of thought, oh, how on earth are we going to support these devices? Because there are a lot of these low-powered, cheap devices, as we've already heard. This is quite an interesting statistic. So worldwide, there's been 1 billion sales of smartphones and 5 times as many normal mobile phones. Some of these may not be using the web, for sure, but we can't assume that. And they'll maybe using browsers such as Opera Mini, such, like a proxy browser that's taking, that we need to really test on. So we really need to think about this. So the first trick is to build a really simple site. I can't emphasize that enough. Simple is good. Yay. So that's where we start. There's a massive benefit of a simple site, and it's really, really quick. So this is tiny. Like, we're talking about 30K, a few assets, and this is kind of our first building block. And this is kind of completely contrary to our old desktop sites that looked something like this. Somewhere, there was some content underneath when it's loaded some JavaScript. Sorry, yeah, that came first. And so we spent a lot of time working out what this is. And this is obviously the whole, content first, mobile first malarkey. But that has to be your starting point. If you started from somewhere else, this is going to be really, really difficult. And this is kind of you do it at the beginning, and sometimes that's the only chance to get it right. So this is kind of what we use, mobile first, and then we're adding layers of progressive enhancement to make it even better. I want to go a stage further than just mobile first. I want to say crap mobile first. And this is this old drawer that we have in the office. We want the content working on those devices. It doesn't have to do anything special. It just users need to be able to look at your content. So this is kind of what we end up with. We can access the same content in both scenarios. Old devices, Google plays with it nicely. All the content is there. And then we have an enhanced version as well. But you're probably all thinking, how do you make that judgment call? How do we decide what is a modern browser and what is an old browser? And so we basically have a test. So some of you might have seen this already. It's called the cuts the mustard test. And basically, what we do is run a small piece of JavaScript, and we do a bit of feature detection. Something like this. So the first one, query selector. This means that we can basically avoid massive DOM libraries. We're currently using jQuery 2, and we're able to completely strip out Sizzle. So it's kind of, once you've got rid of that, and you've got rid of the animation, you've kind of halved the size of that JavaScript. It's not only the loading, it's also when it's being passed. So the whole thing is going to be a lot quicker. The second two are kind of inklings of how modern this browser may be. And to be honest, this was a guess. And there's no we didn't come around with lots and lots of data. We kind of had it as a starting point, and we tried to see what happened. And in the end, it was a really, really good cut between these two types of browsers, which was nice. So as I said before, this allows us to avoid large amounts of JavaScript, making the site perform better. And most of the browsers do actually pass. We put some analytics on to see how many are actually which bucket, and the majority were in the cuts the mustard test. And very importantly, we can get features out quicker than we could before. And we're concentrating on future browsers. We're giving them the really complex UI. We're giving them, because we can almost not forget about the past, but we're designing and developing for the future. So to give you kind of an example what the differences are, here's an example of this is the front page. And there at the bottom, there's a weather link on our core experience. So this is browsers that do not cut the mustard. And for browsers that do cut the mustard, the enhanced experience will load up the weather using JavaScript. These are actually fonts. You can't quite see it on this display, but they're kind of different colors overlaid on top of each other, which is a really nice technique. Again, it's quite an advanced technique, which means you do need some baseline of a good browser. And as you can see, there's more customization, like with geolocation, and we're loading in your particular area, the news for your particular area. So this lets us support most of the modern browsers that we not support, enhance the experience of most of the browsers around today. We're not forgetting about these older browsers, but we're just giving them an experience that is quicker and is simpler. And we're using cuts the mustard to make that decision. But most importantly, we're freeing up to make sure that we're concentrating on the future. This is my cue just to have a quick drink, because I always forget. Okay, that's enough cat. Let's talk about performance. Okay, this is the next dirty little secret of responsive. Let's take an example. So this is Obama's webpage when he was going up for election. And it's pretty big, 2.5. That's not as big as some of the ones we heard earlier, but pretty massive for desktop. And we kind of presume that the mobile site will be a lot smaller. And it's not. It's exactly the same size. So something's gone a bit weird here. And which is even more scary about this isn't uncommon. Guy from Akamai has done some research, and 86% of sites that he sampled are the same or larger than the desktop equivalent. So this gives myself and this particular cat a sad face. It shouldn't be this way. So how did it get like this? How do we get to this point where we're kind of flexible and it's a better experience, but we've killed performance? And performance really matters to users. And even if we've done the really good things, like caching assets, we've gzipped things, concatenated, minified, blah, 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 go look at Google page speed stuff, we've kind of lost the plot a little bit, and we've forgotten that performance really matters. And it's a cultural thing, and you really need to get everybody on board. And at the BBC, we have a lot of different groups giving us different components on the site. So for example, the ID system, when you log in, is a different team. The comment system is a different team. You have one particular component that you're loading on, you may have problems with adverts. It can kill the whole performance. You could be as careful as you possibly can, but unfortunately, it just takes one to kill it. So this is quite a good rule. I can only get GPRS at home. It's really, really slow. And this is kind of quite a good gauge. And it also depends on your users, right? So BBC iPlayer plays a video. You don't expect it to work with GPRS. But BBC News, you could be somewhere in Syria, you could be wanting to get that news damn quickly, and you may have a poor connection. Now, we have a responsibility to make sure that that person can get that content. So facts like these are really, really important. So the next big one is images. So Matt, tomorrow, I think, is talking about images. So I'm just going to briefly touch on how the BBC has approached it, and not try and copy what he's done. So images are the big thing when you download your site. I really like this kind of performance budget thing that's kind of been bandied around. I'm not quite sure who came up with it first. But as you can see, when you're looking at your performance budget, images are the big thing you need to think about. Not only are they quite big files, every single image is a separate HTTP request. And many responsive sites, kind of what they do is get the big picture, and then they'll scale it down on the clients on a mobile phone to the appropriate size. So they'll just do 100% width, so it scales. So this sucks for two reasons. It's a massive file, so that's bad, which means that someone's got to pay that price. And I don't think it's fair that the mobile phone should be paying the same price in the performance budget as the big fancy laptop. And also, some of these smaller phones have got poor processors, and you're going to try and scale this big, massive image, and it's going to be fine on iPhone 5, but on some devices, if you have dozens of images that you're scaling, it's going to suffer on performance. So what do? We take quite a drastic stance. So for our core experience, this is the browsers that don't cut the mustard. We give them one image, because we kind of deem them as secondary content. And we give it quite a low resolution. So it's going to look fairly good on most browsers, but it's going to download really, really quickly. We also add some hidden divs on the stories going down the page. And we're going to use JavaScript to basically scan through, picking out these divs and images. And then based on the container size of this image, we're going to calculate the width. And then we've got a service on the server that can take width dimensions, and we're going to resize the source image that we already have to give it an appropriate size for that particular browser, which means you're downloading just the bit that you need. So the core image at the top looks something like this. It's just a plain image, and we just add another class so the JavaScript can kind of hook onto it. And the hidden div basically is a div, and we're going to, with JavaScript, create image tags and add them as we go down the page. So this is good, which means the mobile phone user is going to pay less of a penalty, less of a price. Sure, there are drawbacks. You're doing it with JavaScript, which means you're kind of bypassing the browser's optimization, which kind of sucks. And on that core image, we're double downloading. So we're getting the core image, and then we're replacing it. But it's that core image is so small, we kind of take that hit. So next, we're going to talk about media queries. So yeah, our friend media query. There's a couple of problems I see with these. My main gripe with media queries is it's all about viewport size. And this kind of gets you into the mentality of talking about breakpoints. And then designers talk about, oh, this is the design for this breakpoint, which is an iPhone. And this is the one for this breakpoint, which is an iPad. And this one, which is a MacBook Pro Retina. And you kind of get into this routine of talking about devices again, which is kind of where we wanted to get away from. And for example, when we have a 2-column layout, when we go from 1 to 2, and we've got a component on the right-hand side, it's kind of tricky because you get the viewport for the whole thing, and it'd be quite interesting to see for the actual element itself. And then secondly, that browsers tend to download all of the CSS, for even if the particular style sheet does not apply because of its media query to that particular device. So we thought we'd fix that. So as I said, all the devices start off with the core CSS because it doesn't cut the mustard. Everybody gets this, the same HTML and the same core. And that's the starting point for everybody. And then we use a bit of JavaScript to load in an appropriate CSS file. And we only download the right one. And then we had a slight problem with the manager started resizing the window. I was like, damn, we haven't got that style sheet. So we added that as well. You know, it kind of works out on the resize event. We need to download another CSS to make it desktop or thing. And the API for us looks something like this. So we can just send what media query should apply for and the type of device that it will be. So we're saving HTTP requests, and we're saving on the processing of applying the CSS, blah, blah, blah. So that's all good. Which kind of brings me on neatly to complexity. So to make responsive web design, we haven't been given the best tools in the world, and which means that we can end up with a bit of dog's dinner when it comes to the site code. And if there's one bit of advice, is to kind of simplify. Even at the beginning with designs, do things need to be that complicated? Some designers kind of get really focused on the edge cases, and you end up with really complicated requirements. And then you develop the code to deal with these edge cases, and everything gets quite scary. Yeah, simplify, simplify, simplify. Another thing that we tend to do is render all our HTML on the server. So this has lots of benefits. Non-JS devices can use your site. It's no big deal. We keep all our templates in one place. We did a lot of JavaScript templating in iPlay, and we ended up with things all over the place. Things weren't changed in one place, and we forgot to do it in the other. And JS rendering tends to be slow. I think there was it Twitter, I think last year, went from JavaScript templating to the server, and they saw 20% improvement in speed. And translations are a lot easier. So I don't know if you know that BBC not only has the English sites, but we have 27 language sites. It's called the BBC World Service. And so we have a lot of translations to work. So this kind of makes our job a lot easier. We all love tools. So to deal with, say we've written the best code in the world, it's all good. Tools can really help. And I should probably be impartial, because I'm at the BBC, between SAS and less, but SAS is better, right? I'm going to get killed. So yeah, these are the two types of tools that we really love. CSS preprocessors and some kind of JavaScript loader stroke dependency management thing. And we like the AMD flavor of that. So I'll just quickly show you how SAS has really helped us. So this is one of our right to left sites. Scary. With plain CSS, this would have been really hard. We'd have had a lot of duplication. But with SAS, we can do some clever mixing stuff. So we can just set a right to left flag, true or false, and we've added a function called flip. And then we can really have lovely, lovely dry code to make this right to left happen really, really well. because when we've got 27 sites, that's a lot of duplication. So we use Sass. The main win for us is to keep things dry and also to manage concatenation as well to help performance. And similar with AMD, asynchronous module definition. I'm not sure if you're all aware what it is, but it allows you to define modules in JavaScript and, more importantly, pull in dependencies. So this define method, the first argument is a list of dependencies that are going to be brought in asynchronously, which is good and fast. And also for testing, we can like swap things out. So for example, the device inspector, that's based on a viewport width and other variables in the browser. We can mock that out and say it is this type of device and test this component and see how it behaves. It's really good, a way of decoupling your code and also concatenating your JavaScript as well. So for example, we have a big all.js file. Everybody's probably got one of those. But we also have other files as well that are for specific pages. So for example, a photo gallery page has a lot more JavaScript. So we're not going to stick that with the big file. We're going to have that separate. So if you hit the first page on the index, on the home page, you just get what you need. And then when you go to the photo gallery, we may conditionally load that extra things that you need. OK, another drink break. I'm not sure what happened to the cat, by the way. I'm sure it's fine. OK, the next dirty little secret, hiding content. So this is one mechanism of when you've got a lot of content on the page that you may want to show to desktop users. But for mobile, it's just way too much. A lot of it is kind of tertiary, secondary content. It's not the essence of the page. But what do you do about it? One approach is you stick it on the page and then you hide it. So this is kind of sucky for several reasons. Users should only download what they use. And some browsers are quite picky about images. And you can hide a particular element and actually they're still downloaded. So you need to be really careful. And it's the sort of thing that can creep in. You hide a little bit, it'll be OK. And then it kind of keeps on going, and before you know it, you've just got a massive initial download. And that initial HTML page really matters, because we have to wait for that. Okay, that's until we have something like Speedy, that is the bottleneck. So we need to make that as small as possible. So what we looked at doing was conditionally loading extra content for larger screens. We still hide the little bits, a tiny little bit sometimes, because sometimes it just makes sense. We're not going to use up an AJAX request to pull something in. Sometimes you need to be a little bit pragmatic about these. So this is our first stab at it. As you can see, we've got a top stories promo component, features analysis stories, most read and most watched. And right down the bottom, we've got more stories from this particular section, which was great. We thought this was awesome. And then we looked again, and we saw that we kind of created a different problem, and that we've added 4 additional HTTP requests. So we kind of fixed one thing, and actually, we kind of broken something else. And the HTTP requests are really expensive. Even if you're on 4G, okay, on a mobile device, TCP/IP was kind of designed for fixed connections. And so the more connections you have to wake up the radio, it gets long, and lots of latency, especially if you're sat in, I don't know, Indonesia or somewhere. You'll be surprised how long it takes for your request and response time to come back. So we had to kind of look again about how we were going to do it. So we already had these 2 strategies. We could hide the content, or we could post-load using JavaScript. And then we came up with a third, which basically to batch up some of these conditional loaded pieces of secondary content. Yay, we got rid of some HTTP requests. This is kind of a little game for us. We kind of look at the web inspector and try and think of ways we can reduce the number of HTTP requests and making them smaller as well, and making them quicker back to the client. And so that's great. So how did we do that? what we do is, in the page, we'll put tiny little hidden anchor tags with the href of the source on the server, the rest of the endpoint, and the ID, something that the JavaScript can actually hook onto. And then an ickle bit of JavaScript. And this is basically just going to tell the loader what this component is and how it should load. So we tell it what sort of loading strategy we're going to do. We're going to load it on its own. If it's already baked in, it's obviously already going to be there. Or if it's going to be batched up. And what sort of device groups we're going to apply it to. We actually call these device groups kind of 1, 2, 3, and 4 to try and get away from actually using device names, to try and people really think. And again, this is kind of a last resort. I'd have already asked, why isn't that content not on mobile? Surely that content should be just, the experience should be slightly different. But there's always slight components that are kind of navigational for desktop that we don't really need on mobile, and we want to make it as clean and concise. Maybe if it should or shouldn't be on desktop is maybe a different question. So that's what that looks like. So when we batch that up, we get another advantage as well. We're not seeing multiple flashes of content. Because if that features analysis was loaded first, that would have been at the top, and then top stories would have tried to jump it, and you would have sort of seen this jumping up, which people don't tend to like. So that the performance went up. It was really good. Another thing we tried was lazy loading content. So for example, these tabs, we've got most read content, and we thought, I'm not sure how many people actually use that tab. How about we load it when you click it? This is coming from, you should only load what the user's going to need. And then we kind of realized on mobile phones, the time it's woken up the radio, making that request, there's so much delay, it really, really sucks. So as a general rule now, we try to avoid waking up the radio. He doesn't like it. He's going to bite you. OK, the next responsive, dirty little secret, testing. Testing has kind of got harder. And we're really lucky at the BBC that we've got a tester. And we've got a cupboard full of devices. And that's good. But obviously, in smaller companies, you kind of haven't got that luxury. But you can't really get away from manual testing with real devices. So if there's kind of one recommendation is to really look at your stats, see what devices your users are actually using, and buy those, or steal them, or borrow them, or do something. Just get hold of them and give them to the developers as quickly as possible in the process of developing a feature. It's almost, at the end, it's too late. We've had scenarios where we've basically exposed our sandbox, and our product owner has gone over to Kenya and done some actual guerrilla user testing with users over there with some terrible phones, and actually got instant feedback to the developer. So like we just, in a break, we'd have just changed some of the code on the sandbox. And testing like that is really, really important. So it's not only the devices themselves, people use them in different ways. But we try and limit as much manual testing as we can. And we're a big fan of automated testing. And we use Cucumber with Capybara. And this is a great way, even with responsive design, we can tell the browser to resize itself and check certain things are in the right place, certain things are loaded. So for example, we've got a test for the CSS loader. So we can check that certain files are downloaded and other things haven't. So we can keep an eye on what's going on. Some great little tools. We use Phantom.js on the sandbox, which is a headless browser. And it's so damn quick. Like our tests fly in about 5 minutes. And we're just putting together a WebDriver with Selenium. And we're going to be doing this kind of nightly over as many browsers and hopefully simulators as well as we can. And because they're a little bit more flaky, we're going to try and we'll probably do them at night and see how that goes. So the other things always slip through the net. We've had incidents where a slight CSS change has broken a lot of devices because we've not checked properly. So UI regression is really important. And you want to try and take away as much manual stuff as possible. So one thing we've started looking at is some tooling for it. And we've got a system that produces a comparison of two screenshots. So what we basically do is use Phantom.js to take a screenshot of what's on our live server, and then we take another screenshot of what's on stage or on our sandbox, and be able to compare those two things. I mean, this is a bit crazy because it's a big redesign. We've got the second column down the right-hand side, but you could imagine you could see a slight change, and we do it over lots of different page types, across lots of different languages, across lots of different sizes of the window. It's Phantom.js, so it's not real browsers, but it does pick up quite a lot. And it's super easy. It really is. Phantom.js, you tell it what size the window needs to be, tell it to go to a URL and render and capture that screenshot. And we use image magic to do the cool blue thing. So you give it the two different images, and it will diff them, or compare them rather, and give you that nice blue diff. And you can be clever about it as well. You know, you can do some alerts or something. We may kind of open source this thing, get it on GitHub, but to be honest, it's really easy. The next testing we do is performance testing. So performance is really close to our heart. We've got lots of users all over the world, and some of them are not as lucky as we are of having great connections in Europe. And one thing we've started doing is logging all our, on the server, sampling HAR files, HTTP archive. And you can get great statistics about the performance of your site from these. And so, for example, this is HAR storage. It's really good. And basically, you can get all sorts of statistics from it. And it's kind of like your web inspector, but you can take samples of it over time. And we found, and this is Phantom.js again. As you can see, we're big fans. And you can basically dump a HAR file because it's using JavaScript, it's going to be very similar to the experience devices are going to have. So we found problems with this. This is when I forgot to add some JavaScript modules into the compilation. And so when the JavaScript had a dependency and it didn't have it in the all.js, it was downloading additional files. And this showed up on our continuous integration. So this is really, really cool. OK, the last section is about scaling. So this is kind of a bit of a sidestep. But for the BBC, obviously, it's quite important. Again, we haven't got loads of money. We're not a Facebook. We can't afford thousands of servers. So we need to be a bit cunning about how we can actually serve all the people that are going to hit our site. So we cache pretty much everything. Very few requests that hit our front servers hit our PHP layer. We try and cache as much as we possibly can. So when someone comes into BBC, they hit Varnish. So Varnish is a HTTP proxy server, and it's one of my favorite bits of tech. If you have this in front of your server, you can expect a 10 times increase in performance. It's awesome. And we also add some context to that request as well. So for example, if you came from a particular country, the US, then we would add an annotation to the HTTP header so we know which country you're from. And then we're able to vary by it. So it's not just one response that we get back. We can vary by country as well. So that's going to hit our PHP layer, our front end. And we have a separate service layer, which is our API. And on the way back, we're going to add a cache control. And so Varnish is going to take that and store it for us. So when we have millions, I mean literally millions of people hitting our site, you go for an election or a tsunami, we get a lot of users hitting and going for that site really, really quickly. And this basically protects us. Varnish is always good because I talked about context before, but it allows us to do slight variations as well. So we can vary by country, as I said before. So we have different editions for US or international or the UK, but on the same domain. We don't particularly use this, but iPlayer, for example, will vary by device type. and that's really useful for them, so they'll have a very different experience. Responsive design doesn't quite fit with what they want to do, and this is probably how LinkedIn kind of works as well, and also some personalizations. So we're kind of getting the benefits of a really good caching system with just a little bit of variation as well. But you've also have a really good look at your hit-miss ratios with caching. And this comes back to performance as well. I mean, if you're a front-ender, you kind of like, yeah, whatever, this is a service doing that. But this really helps in the time it takes for that response to come back. And your site is, as I said before, that initial request is was one of the main bottlenecks. So we've done this kind of thing before. Basically killed the whole caching. And it's with monitoring and keeping an eye on your miss-hit ratios that you make sure it's all good. So quickly talk about when the really big events happen. So this is kind of what our traffic looks like, and then bang, we'll have a tsunami, unfortunately, or an election, or something like that. And we have kind of another layer of protection. And this is our CDN. And unfortunately, when we do CDN, we lose that context and variation. So we send out public cache headers, which means we lose the vary in the headers, and so everybody gets the same version. But it saves our bacon, and we can make sure that we're getting the content for all our users. So that's about it. I'm just going to leave you with one thought, and that's just to really remember the little guys. And a few other people have mentioned this as well. You know, it's not all about iPhones and Androids. We really get some of these in your cupboard. They don't cost much, and see what the site looks like. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John. That's another fantastic presentation. This is one hell of a conference, huh? Lots and lots of great questions coming through, which is awesome, because I think it's great that it's nice to see responsive design tackled at this scale, and also from a team that's been so willing to share so much as they go through about how they went about that process and stuff. I'm curious, so initially, did you have to get buy-in from anybody, like from management or anything like that, to go this route? And if so, how did you go through that? Was there any like political kind of struggles along the way?
Yeah, it was difficult. As I said before, the desktop site was their little baby. You know, they really wanted to protect it. But they knew this mobile thing was coming. And we were quite lucky that our product owner was super awesome. And so we were able kind of to almost we had our own little startup at the BBC. We were away from the main desktop guys, and we kind of started from scratch. Started from the content first approach. And yeah, they were really supportive. I think they were kind of thinking, it's going to be a disaster. And they didn't really get the whole performance thing either. They kind of, and then as soon as we did a survey, and it came up really highly, that people really appreciated how fast the site was. So I think, yeah, it turned out well in the end, but there's a lot of people that were dubious at the beginning.
So the performance thing, if they didn't get it, I mean, was the survey kind of key to getting, you talked about getting buy-in from the different teams and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Comment teams and stuff like that. Yeah. Was that a result of the survey? I mean, is that what flipped them?
I think it was, from developer point of view, like every developer wants to do a great job, but it's often the product owners and the managers that don't quite get it. And it's probably just a problem with larger companies when you do have these components. But even if you have a third party like Facebook, or you have ads put in, it can really kill it.
The other thing too, and I think this kind of played in your favor, is the fact that you guys you approached this as a responsive mobile site. I mean, right? This wasn't immediately replacing the desktop thing or anything like that, which, I think a lot of people feel like they need to tackle it all at once. But by segmenting off it into its own thing, as you said, almost like a little startup, it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how much wiggle room you have and what you can play with.
Yeah, exactly. We're really lucky. We almost had a kind of a prototype, very, very beta-ish. And because the business was so concerned with desktop, was like, yeah, you guys do what you want. And so we were able to overtake the old mobile site and redirect traffic. So we could redirect certain segments of devices, which has been really, really useful. And so we can do it incrementally. So we can do feature phones, because we've got we've got a worthwhile database, so we can redirect users. And then we can do smartphones, and then we can do small tablets, and then we can do tablets. And instead of doing the massive one hit, big complex, big risk, we can do it, and we can drip feed it.
Have you noticed any maintenance implications, or like, since you've started doing this, has it increased the costs of maintenance, decreased it? What have been the results of that?
Because we've reduced the number of stacks, we've moved the complexity basically from the server to the front end. And because that is one team now, it's much easier to be able to manage that. Before, the server and the API had a concept of what a mobile was. That would have a separate feed. And so everything was entangled together. And now it's just content. And it's the front end that is where most of the maintenance problems comes. And with tooling and great code and great developers, you can...
Yeah, I'm sure the automated testing kind of stuff that you discussed helps a lot. The content creation doesn't get segmented at all, correct? That's coming from the same place for both the mobile responsive and the other?
That's right.
Okay, yeah. And so nothing really got added there in terms of complexity?
No, so previously all the journalists would be able to flag, oh, I don't want this story on mobile. It's like, why don't you want this story on mobile? And so there was this concept in the CMS of different device types. And of course, we have stuff on TV as well, and CFAX that's just been turned off. But we're kind of going away from that now, and the CMS and the API will be completely device agnostic, and it's just going to be pure content.
So you obviously put a lot of emphasis on the performance of the site, right? I mean, that was a recurring theme all the way through the presentation, which is awesome. Where did you guys, the 10-second thing that you came up with, the 10-second budget, where did you come up with that number from?
I think it was our tester. We basically did some experiments. We had a phone on GPRS, and we kind of measured it.
And you just kind of decided that 10 seconds seemed like a decent for that particular thing. So it wasn't like
it's a bit of a guesstimate.
Okay, a guesstimate. Has it worked out pretty well though? You think that budget seems to be fairly?
Yeah, I think we've gone over it a little bit. And the whole budget thing, you've really got. It's just a great starting point. It makes you really think about, should we have this lovely UI or should we not? And it kind of gives you something to balance against. And before we kind of go, yeah, I want that flashy one. And actually now you're kind of thinking, well, there is an implication of doing that, and that it's hurting our budget.
So if you're a little bit over, I'm guessing then you don't like strictly enforce, because theoretically you could have that as part of the build process, right?
Yeah, exactly, yes. And we have some tests about the number of files, number of HTTP requests, and the build will fail if it goes over too many.
Okay, more kind of related. When you pull in the advanced UI, I know you had mentioned like pulling them all concatenated, that kind of avoided some of the reflow issues, but if you pull in like the advanced, like the images and stuff like that, do you have reflowing that takes place, or are you doing something to kind of prevent that kind of issue?
No, yeah, so you may see some reflow.
Okay.
So we probably can do a lot more improvements on that.
And to clarify, the low-res images getting replaced, that's not a screen size determination, right? That's the cutting the mustard thing.
Yeah, so the initial core image, we would have determined that up front.
Do you do any sort of like performance-related things, like being able to tell the speed of the network or the condition of the network?
No, we don't at all. I'm not sure where we would use it. Oh, actually, I lie. The only place we do use it is for video. So our video player will do a lookup to see what sort of connection you're actually on, and supply a different video stream based on that. And that's about it, really. I'm not sure where we would use it and how you'd have switches for users to be able to go for different modes. I kind of think that we try and give users the best experience we possibly can, and without any complexity, with like configuring anything for the user.
I think one of the common things that come up when they're talking about like, can you detect the performance, is for that decision for like the retina images and stuff like that. But I kind of like the approach that was discussed earlier, which is the we don't necessarily get to make that decision. Even if they have a high-speed network, it could be entirely possible that, like he said, it could be roaming or whatever it is, and I may want that lower fidelity image anyway, so the performance might be almost... I could see its uses, but I do think in some cases, it's a little bit dangerous to kind of make those assumptions.
Yeah, I'll be curious of how many users will switch and make that decision. Would it be a power user thing? Or are we best to actually make that assumption for the users?
That would be really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. So on the home page, we wouldn't load up a retina image. Some of the icons are retinas because there's not much image size differences, so we might as well. But for example, if you click through to a photo gallery, I think if you're on an iPad, you kind of presuming that you're going to see really top quality. And if you made that decision to go to a photo gallery, because we've kind of prompted it, I think that's kind of okay. I think it's important to set users' expectations. And if there's a video on that page as well, it kind of gives them a little inkling of what sort of images they're going to see, and I think you can get away with it.
Also, I guess maybe the last thing too, quick before you, is again, a lot of thinking went into it. Have you noticed any impact on user engagement as a result of what's the difference between the MDOT site for this before and what you guys have in place now? Have you noticed anything noticeable there?
Yes, we've seen our AI score go up a little bit. So from the survey that we did, and we kind of expected it to dip because most new kind of designs and redesigns, you do see an initial kind of dip with user testing, but it's been really good. We've had really good feedback. I mean, the biggest challenge is going to be going all the way up to desktop, and we're getting there. We've done certain page types, but it's going to be.
So that is the plan then, is to have this eventually surpass the desktop,
exactly.
Expand to everything.
That's right.
But right now it's only certain sections of the BBC site, correct, that have this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks,
Great.
John. I'm sure.
Cheers, Tim.